Good morning, everyone. I am Senator Doug Mastriano, Chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee. I call this hearing to order. And I'd like to thank all the committee members who are here physically joining us today. Senator Williams, thank you. Senator Tartaglione, thank you. Senator Pennycook, thank you. Online, we do have Senator Brooks. Yes, lower left. And Senator Kane. On February 3rd, a Norfolk Southern train had a 38-car derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, just a short distance away from the Pennsylvania border. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, the derailed equipment included 11 tank cars carrying hazardous materials that subsequently ignited, fueling fires that damaged an additional 12 non-derailed rail cars. It is known that some of the hazardous chemicals included the cancer-causing vinyl chloride. This incident and subsequent burning of the train cars and chemicals has received national and indeed international attention, particularly as there's been at least 7 train derailments so far this year. On February 23rd, this committee held an initial hearing in Beaver County, not far from the derailment. We heard from the residents as well from the administration here in Pennsylvania regarding their response efforts. We heard from local officials, attorneys, as well as from first responders who were on the scene that day. We invited Alan Shaw, Norfolk Southern president and CEO, but he declined through counsel. As such, on March 1st, this committee subpoenaed Mr. Shaw to appear before us on March 8th and asked him to provide documentation related to the derailment. Since then, we have been in communication with Norfolk Southern's representatives, and I agreed to continue this hearing until today. On March 8th, this committee advanced Senate Resolution 59, which recognizes the impacts of the derailment, as well as Senate Bill 508, which sets up a fund to assist Pennsylvania residents and business owners affected by the derailment. We also officially subpoenaed documents from Norfolk Southern. Earlier this week, Norfolk Southern conveyed a number of documents to us. These documents are currently being reviewed. Since our initial hearing, there have been a number of developments in Pennsylvania, including PEMA's Trail Derailment Dashboard website going online, Department of Health's Health Resource Center located in Darlington Township to help with immediate needs with the toxic issues with people. And Governor Shapiro received $7.4 million from Norfolk Southern. We are here today to continue exercising our committee's oversight responsibilities. We're still unraveling what occurred, as well as who made what decision when and how to prepare for and handle such situations in the future so this does not happen again. Today we have several people to testify before us today. We have Mr. Shaw, to his credit, testified before Congress, agreed to financial reparations, and continued to be engaged with the Commonwealth and federal agencies in regards to this catastrophe. We also have 2 additional testifiers, Mr. Robert Comer, who is a forensic railroad accident investigator and has 800 investigations under his belt. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Andrew Welton, a professor of civil engineering and ecological engineering at Purdue University. But before we go to that, I'd like to place into record the written testimony submitted from our panelists and experts and their exhibits marked A, B, C, and D, and E as well. Before we begin with the testifier, however, I'd like to ask my co-chair, Senator Katie Muth, for opening comments.
Since I'm late, I will defer my time for comments, so make sure we have enough time for member questions. So thank you, everyone, for participating today.
Thank you, Senator Muth, and thank you for being here as well. We do appreciate it. So Dr. Andrew Welton, professor of civil engineering and ecological engineering at Purdue University. He is online. He's going to tell us about the testing and what he has seen to date. And 1 minute here. Is he online? Okay, great. Yes. You have that. And Dr. Welton, could you stand up and please raise your right hand? And do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to talk with you all today and to share some of the observations that we've had firsthand interacting with the people of Pennsylvania impacted by this disaster. as well as individuals in Ohio and other states as too. I'd just like to say that this testimony represents my personal opinions. It does not represent that of Purdue University, my department, or college, but it does represent 20 years of experience responding to and helping communities identify health risks and recover from disasters. I would also like to say that I'm not going to read my testimony verbatim. You can read that. It's written into the ledger. But I will mention that I have been called into disasters in California after the 2018 Camp Fire when folks didn't really understand what they should be testing for. I've been called into the Marshall Fire in 2021 in Colorado, where 5 days after the fire, they wanted to know what to test for, where to test, and how to recover as fast as possible, and a number of other disasters as well. The disaster in East Palestine, which affected Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Indiana, and other states, had significant impacts on people and economies. While only 4,500 people live in and around East Palestine, as I mentioned, 37 million people live in the states that border it. In February of 2023, I provided advice to community groups who were asking questions about water and air safety. I then was approached by people from Pennsylvania and Darlington asking about air and water safety. They were sending pictures of material that seemed to have deposited in their pools and in their property. And they wanted to know about the safety of this and whether or not their kids could play near it or their pets could. Due to the lack of available information in reviewing government testing data that was posted online, which wasn't much, we organized a volunteer team at Purdue University in Indiana, and we drove 7 hours to East Palestine. Since then, we've been there 3 times, and we've been in Darlington as well. What we have found is that in our first trip, acute health risks remained, even though the narrative was that they were not there, with the creeks. And there were no access controls to these creeks. People had their kids near them. People were walking their dogs near them. Workers were walking underneath these aeration units that were blowing the polluted water and contamination into the air. And there was no adequate personal protection or safety approach in that situation. So we notified OSHA about our discoveries. We notified the US EPA, we notified the state of Ohio, the US senators in Ohio, and others, asking them to please intervene and protect people from the acute health risks that remained. We also, in March 7th, submitted a letter to the US Senate Environment and Public Works Committee as a public comment, identifying that we had found several chemicals in the creek water that officials weren't testing for, but were definitely related to the fire. So we have urged these agencies to correct their testing approaches, and we haven't seen that yet because it's pretty hard to understand what the health risks are for something if you're not testing for them. On March 12th, I shared additional new study results at an East Palestine meeting with a community group called United for East Palestine. And in that, we compared federal, state, and county air and water testing results and showed that agencies are not testing for a whole bunch of things that they've identified as health risk in air, but haven't tested for in the surface water or haven't tested for in the well water. I also looked at Pennsylvania DEP's data, and they too have indicated that they're testing for 3 chemicals of concern in the wells: vinyl chloride, ethylene glycol, and ethanol, which means that they're not testing for a whole bunch of other things that could be associated with the spill. And so ultimately, it's unclear who is advising these agencies about what to test for. I have been involved in disaster response for many years. I generally come in when people don't really know what to test for and agencies are kind of moving in different directions, and that seems to be the case here. I would encourage officials to start testing for the chemicals of concern in these areas across the board. This past weekend, I returned to East Palestine and I worked with the community group, and we sampled soil, we sampled water, we sampled creek water, and we sampled air. There's a tremendous need for the people in Ohio and Pennsylvania to understand the safety of their water, air, and soil so that they can find a way back to some sense of normalcy and businesses can thrive. In closing, I encourage Pennsylvania leaders to support their citizens through extensive and a very deliberate environmental sampling and monitoring. I also encourage you to engage researchers who are comfortable operating in the unknown. This is what my cadre is trained to do. Professors across the country are trained to understand how to ask specific questions and then answer them by understanding which things matter and which things don't. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I will pass it back to you.
Thank you, Doctor. Your research discovered acrolein in the derailment area. This chemical was and is not being used. Wait a second here. This chemical is not being tested for by the EPA in either Pennsylvania or Ohio. Is that true?
The US EPA is testing for it in the air,
Okay.
but the Ohio EPA is not testing for it in the water. And to my knowledge, Pennsylvania DEP is not testing for it in the water either.
What are the known dangers if someone ingests it or inhales it?
Acrolein is a known carcinogen, but really the most important issue initially is acute exposures. So headaches, nausea, vomiting, ear, nose, and throat issues. Long-term, it can be a carcinogen that can cause long-term health effects.
So my chief and staff and myself were there last month in the area for about 5 or 6 hours, and splitting headache, burning respiratory system, rashes breaking out, and discoloration of the skin. Is that an effect of that toxin?
Well, let me first say I'm sorry that you and your staff experienced that. I too experienced headaches after going to the area. That I directly attribute to the uncontrolled chemical exposures that were happening at the creeks that were not access controlled. So it's hard to pinpoint which chemical caused the side effects or the impacts, but I can tell you that there were exposures that were happening that were not being documented and people were not warned about them.
The other chemical that you mentioned was butoxyethanol. If you could tell us if that's being tested for.
So 2-butoxyethanol is a chemical that's being tested for in the creeks, I believe, but in Ohio, it's not being tested for in the drinking water. And 2-butoxyethanol at high enough concentrations can also cause acute health impacts, but I do not believe it's linked to cancer.
And do you believe that is the discoloration we see in Leslie Run and the other creeks when we disturb the riverbed?
That's a great question. We don't know exactly what's causing that discoloration. There have been a number of theories that it's some of the lube oil that went down the stream or it's free product, butyl acrylate. We've heard a number of theories, but nobody's actually pinpointed what that is. We're trying to figure that out.
And finally, the health effects of being exposed to butoxyethanol.
So from an acute, immediate standpoint, headaches, nausea, disorientation, and other types of ear, nose, and throat issues. There are also long-term health effects as well that are well documented because this chemical has been studied elsewhere by toxicologists, and I would defer to them.
Thank you. Senator Muth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. Welton. I follow you on Twitter since you have been reporting about some of the testing, which I just wondered if you could clarify for everyone watching what you recommend Pennsylvania be testing for in the air, soil, and water, as well as Ohio, so we know when we get results back to make sure that that's actually in the testing data.
So thank you for the question. There is a PowerPoint figure in my testimony that kind of works through which media is being tested and what chemicals the state of Ohio and EPA are testing for. I did not include Pennsylvania DEP in that because it just got too large. But the fact of the matter is I'd be happy to advise whoever wants to know which chemicals they need to be tested for. So many of these agencies are claiming to test for 80 chemicals or 100 chemicals, but the numbers don't matter. It matters what you test for and whether or not it's cross-cutting. You're looking for the air, you're looking for the water, you're looking for the soil, all for the same thing. And so there's just a number of different chemicals that people aren't testing for, and I'd be happy to help whoever asks.
Yeah, I would appreciate, at least I would, like to see what your recommendations would be for all three, air, soil, and water, like a comprehensive list, so that, again, whatever data we get back from the state, we can compare that suite to, your recommendations. And, have you known of any group or entity doing any type of testing for radium or radiological contaminants?
I do not know of any group doing testing for those contaminants.
Do you think that's something that should be tested for, considering the content or the industries that are related to some of the content that was on the train?
I think, I advise agencies when I get involved in these types of disasters that they need to throw the kitchen sink at it initially to figure out what they need to test for and what they don't need to test for. And so we're testing for heavy metals, and I'm not certain anybody else is testing for that. We're also testing for ions like sulfur and nitrate and other things. Nobody else is testing for that. So it wouldn't be a stretch to look for things like radium and others that other people haven't looked for yet.
Yeah, I was surprised that had not yet appeared in any testing that I have, or any kind of data that has been available by an agency, federal or state, or any kind of nonprofit or outside organization. So if you could follow up with our committee on what you would recommend, I would really appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Just as an aside here, the Department of Health here in Pennsylvania, the secretary recently stated that over 80% of the people who were examined at their mobile health clinic in Beaver County had the symptoms you described of headaches, throat issues, nausea, et cetera, including many of the testifiers we've had before this committee. Senator Pennycook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, he disappeared. I just had a quick question regarding what is being tested for, and if you're in any kind of coordination with the EPA, given the fact that you don't feel that either federal or state officials are testing for the right chemicals. Are you coordinating with EPA and DEP in Pennsylvania?
So that's a great question. Initially, I like to engage agencies to help them, optimize their approach and do so on a volunteer basis. I reached out to the state of Ohio 3 times, and then they never responded. I reached out to the U.S. EPA on-scene coordinator in February, and they never responded. And I did that at the recommendation of somebody at CDC. And so I have tried to engage with these agencies, but they were not responsive. And that was a challenge. I have not reached out to the Pennsylvania DEP or Governor Shapiro's office or the Pennsylvania Department of Health, but I would be happy, like we always do, to provide information to whoever wants it so they can make the best decisions that they can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your testimony. We appreciate your expertise, and I do agree with your assessment. There should be initially a wide swath of testing to err on the side of caution to protect people's lives and livelihoods rather than dealing with health issues and cancers down the road. Thank you, and we look forward to engaging in the future. We appreciate you, and God bless you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sorry,
if I
Senator
may.
Brooks.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Wallen, part of my question has already been asked as far as what you've asked or talked to with Pennsylvania DEP. So would you reach out to our Department of Environmental Protection and request or suggest to them what they should be testing for? And would you cross-copy that suggestion to this committee and its members?
I would be happy to send a letter and forward them the information that I provided the US EPA, that I provided the state of Ohio. I would be happy to do that. I would just also say that we're a 100% volunteer operation. Nobody's paying us to do any of this. And so we're trying to manage the best we can in after hours, trying to do that on top of our kind of day jobs too. So I'm happy to do that. If they wanted to reach out, I'd be happy to talk to them too.
Thank you. I do appreciate that volunteerism and that willingness to do that. In that correspondence, would you also just document or write why you're recommending these specific chemicals be tested for? And then my last question is, how long do you recommend continuing to test for these toxins or chemicals, but in the air, the water, and the soil?
So I'd be happy to provide the recommendations to the DEP about what I believe they're not testing for and they need to. And as far as how long testing should occur, the closer to the incident site, the more frequent, the longer they're going to need to do testing. I was in a location maybe 2 miles away along a creek. I expect that they should do monthly well testing in perpetuity until they understand how water flows in that area and how long it could take for contamination to get in. For areas farther away, they may not need to do monthly testing, but what we know for well water, for example, is that some of the agencies aren't testing for what they need to test for. So what they did today may not have as much relevance to protecting public health as if they did the thorough initial characterization. I expect in Pennsylvania, especially in Darlington, in the area that you're probably looking at least 6 months of heavy testing before folks can really understand how water flows, how long things will take, where the deposition of material went. And that really needs to be answered by very specific questions and collect data to answer those very specific questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, your testimony, and your willingness to reach out to the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. Just as a final thought here, one of our witnesses back last month in Beaver County, Jeff Dillmore, said, "What are we supposed to do? Live in our houses, get poisoned, and wait." That's the feeling there. And with that, thank you, Doctor, for joining us here, and hope we can bring some resolution to those concerns from the residents. I'd like next to bring up Mr. Alan Shaw, the President and CEO of Norfolk Southern, as well as his team. Thank you, Mr. Shaw, for joining us. If you could stay standing, everybody, and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If so, please say, "I do." Thank you. Before you begin, Mr. Shaw, if you could please introduce your team that is with you at the table here. If you could turn the microphone on, thank you.
Yes, Senator, I have Nabanita Nog. She's our Chief Legal Officer.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw, if you could begin with your opening statement, then we'll have questions.
Good morning, Chairman Mastriano, Minority Chair Muth, and distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Alan Shaw, and I've been President and CEO of Norfolk Southern since May of 2022. I want to begin today by expressing how deeply sorry I am for the impact this derailment has had on the citizens of East Palestine and the communities in Western Pennsylvania. I've been to East Palestine and Pennsylvania many times over the past 6 weeks. I've talked with community leaders, business owners, school officials, faith-based leaders, and others throughout the community. They've shared their stories and their concerns about the health of their families, their businesses, and the future of the community they love. I am determined to make this right. Norfolk Southern continues to make good on its promise to clean the site safely, thoroughly, and with urgency. You have my personal commitment. We will get the job done, and we will help these communities thrive. At the direction of and in collaboration with the US EPA and state and local agencies, we are developing and implementing near and longer-term cleanup activities. Air monitoring has been placed continuously since the accident, and to date, it has consistently indicated that the air is safe to breathe. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has recently announced that the first round of groundwater testing has shown no signs of contamination, and that results received from private wells in the area are also clear of contaminants. The Pennsylvania DEP has also announced that due to the short duration of exposure from this incident, health effects from long-term exposure are not expected to occur. In terms of community support, we have announced investments of more than $7.5 million in Pennsylvania to set up a community relief fund and to reimburse Pennsylvania emergency responders, health and environmental agencies for costs related to the derailment. This is just a start. We have also provided support to hundreds of Pennsylvanians through Norfolk Southern's Family Assistance Center, which has been open since the day after the incident. We're also in the planning stages of developing a long-term medical compensation fund, property value assurance program, and long-term water testing program. We look forward to working toward a final resolution with relevant stakeholders to finalize the details of these programs. If residents have a concern, we want them to come talk to us. Our website, nsmakingitright.com, provides the latest information and details on how to reach Norfolk Southern. We have been fully cooperating with the NTSB's investigation into the cause of the derailment. The NTSB's preliminary report found that the Norfolk Southern crew was operating the train below the speed limit and in an approved manner. Yet, it is clear from this incident that we can always improve upon safety. So as the NTSB continues its work, we are not waiting to act. Shortly after the derailment, I instructed my team to look at steps we can take to improve safety beginning immediately. And we have announced a number of initiatives to do just that. These steps are a start, and we look forward to working with policymakers and industry on others. We strive to make our safety culture the best in the industry. The events of the last several weeks are not who we are as a company. When I began my tenure as CEO 10 months ago, I spent hours in crew rooms all over our 22-state network, thanking our frontline railroaders and asking for their advice. They are proud of the important work they do for this great country, and they take safety seriously. I'm going to make sure they have the right training and the right processes and the right equipment and the right technology. You have my commitment on that. Today, I am proud to represent more than 19,700 Norfolk Southern employees who work every day to offer a safe and effective means of transporting goods to businesses and families across our country. Over 2,600 of our employees call Pennsylvania home, and we are proud to play a part in contributing to the economic growth of the Commonwealth, including by investing more than $150 million last year to support our operations in this state. Just last year, we entered into an operating agreement with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation to expand passenger rail access in western Pennsylvania between Pittsburgh and Harrisburg. We will continue to invest in the future of Pennsylvania, just as we have always done. Norfolk Southern is here for the long haul, and we won't be finished until we make this right. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. My first line of questions are unrelated to the NTSB derailment investigation and are entirely focused on post-accident burn decisions and testings. As you heard this morning from Purdue University, as well as Texas A&M, they have reviewed and obtained testing results and the EPA study, and other entities such as Big Pine Consulting LLC of Pittsburgh have released test results indicating serious concern for the region's peoples, animals, waters, and soils. Our Exhibit E from Pennsylvania Executive Departments indicate that CTEH labs have been contracted by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, as well as the PA Department of Health and the PA Department of Ag, and PEMA to conduct air, water, and soil testing. CETA is also contracted and paid for by Norfolk Southern for testing. Is that correct?
Senator, yes, Norfolk Southern uses CTEH.
Thank you. And has Norfolk Southern also used CTEH in other chemical spills as well?
Senator, I don't know the history of that.
Okay. Norfolk Southern told people in the region shortly after the disaster they were safe to return home prior to the testing of their individual homes internally for lingering gas or chemical dust on their property, groundwater, their soil, as well as their water. Is that correct?
Senator, my understanding is that the evacuation order was lifted with input from Unified Command, and the Ohio EPA, the US EPA, and state and local health officials were involved.
So the people were told to go home without testing of their properties and homes, though, correct?
Senator, my understanding is that the US EPA was on site very shortly after the derailment. Air and water monitoring were in place shortly after the derailment.
But not of individual homes.
Senator, my understanding is that the air and water monitoring were done throughout the communities.
Thank you.
And I also understand, Senator, that if the residents of the community wanted air monitoring in their homes done, then that was offered as well.
So Katie Schwarzwalder had someone come in from your contractor. They were going to do testing, but she had to sign a waiver, waiving her around legal rights, and she went to Fox News with that. And I understand your company since said that was an error, but in order to get testing in her home, she had to sign this legal document, getting rid of her legal rights in the future. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I do. And when I heard about that, I was really frustrated, candidly. Senator, that was a form that was used for standard access to property. It had nothing to do with legal rights resulting from this accident. And as soon as we heard about that, we instructed our third-party contractor to remove that language. And we have made it very clear to residents of the community that there are no strings attached.
Good. You have not provided our committee the soil and the water test results that you reportedly were relying on to publicly make the claims of safety. When can we expect Norfolk Southern to provide those test results to us?
Senator, we are working very hard to respond to your requests. We can talk to you about specific requests that you have not received.
Okay, and we're looking forward to those. Have you read a transcript of the telephone call decision to vent and burn? And does a recording of that or transcript exist of that decision shortly after the derailment?
Senator, I am not aware of a transcript from a telephone call.
Okay. Have you produced all the documents under a subpoena as required by the Senate subpoena?
Senator, we produced thousands of pages, and we're working hard to respond to your subpoena. I understand there were some documents related specifically to the cause of the accident, which is under investigation by the NTSB, which we have not been able to provide.
Are you aware of a scathing email from the Pennsylvania Hazmat to Unified Command indicating they were not included in the incident response? And was Pennsylvania Hazmat included in any of these decisions? And if so, if you could list us who they were and when they were included in the decision-making process for the vent and burn.
Pardon me. Senator, my understanding is that from the moment of the accident, we worked to be transparent and cooperative with various state, local, and federal authorities. And the response was managed under the unified command structure established shortly after midnight with the local fire chief serving as the incident commander. Our role in that process was to provide unified command and the incident commander all the relevant information that we could. And my understanding is that state and local authorities, including those from Pennsylvania, were involved.
Or were you on a telephone call on or about Sunday, February 5th, 2023, with Governor Shapiro and Governor DeWine and PEMA Director Patfield when a decision was made to release and burn the deadly chemicals creating phosgene gas? Yes or no?
Senator, I was not on that phone call.
Were the governors asked for input in that decision-making process?
Senator, the ultimate decision made by Unified Command under the leadership of the incident commander was made on Monday, February 6th. Based on the conditions on the ground as we knew them, there was concern about an uncontrolled catastrophic explosion that would shoot harmful chemicals and shrapnel throughout the area. And so the decision made by Unified Command under the direction of the incident commander was a controlled vent and burn.
If I could just clarify something here. So I joined the Army in the 80s. I'm an old soldier. And in that environment, we were all trained in nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. And any chemical release was never called controlled by any of us because there's atmospherics, of course, that weigh in and determine or direct the course these winds will blow or the moisture in the air might take it. We don't control atmospheric dispersion. We could guess at it. So I can't accept any idea that any of this was controlled. Once something is set loose, it's up to the elements. But Senator Muth has a brief question.
Yeah, since you're on this line of questioning, I just need you to clarify, Mr. Shaw. You said that the incident command person was the local fire chief, correct?
The incident commander, which led Unified Command, is the local Fire Chief Drabeck. Yes, ma'am.
So the local fire chief led the entire operation on the ground, including the decision of the burn.
Senator, there were state, federal, and local authorities there as well, and he was in close contact with the governor of Ohio.
So who ultimately then, I guess maybe for the public's sake and my own, can you list who's in the Unified Command? Like who are those entities or people or agencies?
Senator, I can give you a specific list. I'm happy to follow up. I can tell you that it included federal, state, and local agencies from Pennsylvania and from Ohio.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand like who is comprised in this decision-making process based on, because I don't know, I'm not a part of Unified Command. I guess I'm confused then if there's this collaborative effort and then it's ultimately the local fire chief's final say on what happens. Is that, like, who made the final decision of we're going to do this burn? We had a previous hearing where there was mention of modeling, which was my part of the subpoena that was declined to be responded to, about what is this modeling data that was in consideration by Unified Command. And I'm just trying to understand that piece as to how this all happened.
So if I could jump back in here, and please do address that question, but I'm going to back it up here. So I've served in complex inter-service, interagency, multinational organizations. There's always somebody, even if it's consent around the table, there's always somebody that pulls a trigger. There's always somebody that says, okay, we're going to do this. And I find it hard to believe that the local fire chief would be the one making the decision to ignite, to set an explosion off, to ignite 8 carloads worth of toxic chemicals. So what both myself and Senator Muth are after is who gave the nod and the authorization specifically. Who was the trigger man? Who was the guy that said, yes, we're going to do this after going around the table or what have you? Who was the individual that made a decision?
Senator, thank you for that question. I understand your point. My understanding is that the Unified Command was aligned on this, and it was ultimately the decision of the incident commander, the fire chief, in conjunction with Governor DeWine, who was there as well.
And what role, since you're just mere feet from the Pennsylvania border, especially when you dug that trench, which I surmise you built towards the east, because if you built the trench west to dump the chemicals into, it would have been downtown East Palestine. No question was asked to the Shapiro administration on their thoughts about this then.
Senator, my understanding is there were state and local authorities from Pennsylvania there as well, and I can tell you that my understanding is that Governor DeWine was in direct contact with Governor Shapiro.
So in this regard, we received testimony that indicated on the prior to the decision to ignite these catastrophic toxic chemicals, it was one car's worth of toxins that were discussed. Director Padfield said the next day he was told 8 cars would be burned in the end. Additionally, he said the analysis said that the toxic elements released in this burn, which is never controlled, this burn, initially the slide from Norfolk Southern, we're told, was 70% toxins, phosgene, and other very dangerous chemicals. And the next day he said only 1% would be toxic chemicals as a result of the burn. I don't know where these numbers came from. We definitely need to get our hands on that. I do know we subpoenaed this data here. Will you be forthcoming and be able to provide us with this data, as well as the names of all those involved in this decision-making cycle? I know that local fire chief was not the guy on the ground making the final decision on this. There was allegations last week in Congress that this was more a business decision to get the trains running again rather than it was best for the safety of the people. If it was for the safety of the people, the soil would have been removed and the chemicals would have been removed without a burn, as much as possible. And so we need to know who pulled the trigger. So who exactly was the guy or gal behind the scenes there? And the Unified Command Structure said, yeah, we need to do this. And then went around the table, asked for everyone's consent.
Senator, the Unified Command, my understanding, was aligned around the decision. It was led by the incident commander, who was speaking very closely with Governor DeWine.
What role did you play in the authorization to release and then detonate this vent and burn?
Senator, the role of Norfolk Southern throughout the process was to be as transparent as possible and provide as much information to Unified Command about the situation.
You told Congress under oath last week that, quote, Unified Command decided to vent and burn the deadly chemicals because they were focused solely on the health and safety of the community, unquote. But PEMA Director Padfield, who was on the so-called Unified Command phone call with Governor Shapiro and Governor DeWine to authorize the vent and burn, just testified before the Pennsylvania House hearing last week that he was concerned that the reason you decided to release and detonate was a business decision, as I mentioned before, inferring you want to get the trains running again at the fastest moment rather than safely remove the chemicals. What is your thoughts on Randy Padfield's statement? Is that true?
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. I have a different perspective on that, and I'll note that there was a 6 pressurized car that was not venting, that we did not perform the vent and burn upon because of the fact that it was in a different environmental condition than the other cars.
If the Shapiro administration objected, would you have not made the decision to vent and burn?
Senator, that decision was made by Unified Command. We
And
provided
once again, as Senator Muth asked, who exactly is in the Unified Command? Who was that? How many people? Who were they? What agencies? What states?
Senator, we're happy to provide you a list. There were state and local authorities and federal authorities from Pennsylvania and from Ohio.
And lastly, before I hand it over to my colleagues, Pennsylvania residents were told to evacuate into Ohio, showing that the real concern was that the modeling showed that Pennsylvania would have the chemical plume from the so-called vent and burn blowing over that, according to the atmospheric dispersion study that we saw from NASA. Did Pennsylvania members of the Unified Command order no evacuation center set up in Pennsylvania, or was that your order directing people to flee into Ohio?
Senator, I can't comment on that. That was not Norfolk Southern's order.
What role did EPA play in this decision-making cycle?
Senator, I don't have an answer for that.
Senator Muth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we don't know who's in Unified Command. Therefore, we don't know how the decision was made or what modeling data based on what's being answered thus far. So it's difficult for the committee to understand a lot of this in the absence of information. So I guess we're asking for a basic protocol, or as Representative Pennycook asked for in the prior hearing, a standard operating procedure. I would think that just based on hazardous planning an emergency planning, there would be like a basic like flow chart of like, here's who's involved with what, and that would be easier to interpret versus not knowing, but yet this was the decision. So I guess I just have to ask first, if this had happened in a more populated area, would this same burn been the recommendation?
Yeah, Senator, this is based solely on the safety and health of the community. There was concern based on the fact, based on pressures in the rail cars and the fact that several of the rail cars had been in a pool fire of an uncontrolled explosion, which would shoot harmful VCM gas and shrapnel throughout the community. And so the Unified Command, which was state and federal and local authorities, including Georgia and Pennsylvania, and first responders, and we had government officials as well doing the dispersion modeling, all aligned that this was the best decision for.
So there is dispersion modeling. We just don't, we as a committee don't have that information. Is that correct?
Senator, my understanding is the dispersion modeling that was developed by government authorities was used to create the evacuation zone. Yes, ma'am.
We had a prior hearing where government agencies says that Norfolk Southern presented the plan or proposal for the burn and also the evacuation, which we knew that the shrapnel piece of an explosion was a 1 mile radius, but there was no mention of the radius of contaminants, just if something exploded. So I guess my question is, there seems to be some confusion as to whose idea this burn was or how this decision was made. So could you clarify that for the committee?
Yes, Senator, the experts on the ground were very concerned about the pressure in some of the vessels.
And those are experts that are Norfolk Southern employees or consultants?
Contractors, yes, ma'am.
Contractors from what types of, if you can't say the names of the companies for legal reasons, what types of contractors or consultants?
Contractors who specialize in hazmat. And so, Senator, then the decision was made to do a vent and burn. There was.
And once again, who was that decision made by?
By Unified Command, sir.
Who specifically in Unified Command said this is what we're going to do? You're blaming it on a chief in East Palestine at this point, is that correct?
Senator, the Unified Command was under the leadership of the incident commander, who was in close coordination with Governor DeWine.
So your cars are on fire, it's your rail, it's your incident, and you're going to leave it to a local fire chief who probably never had to deal with potentially such a catastrophe before. And he's going to make the decision.
Senator, the Unified Command, pardon me, was taking input from a number of different constituencies, some of which were modeling the evacuation zone. It also included first responders, and it included state and local.
Yeah, I get it.
health
It's a
officials.
diverse mix of people, but who
But
said?
who are these people?
Thank
Like,
you.
is there a special, like, I'm hoping to
Thank
God
you.
there's someone with a lot of knowledge and all these things.
Who said we're going to
chemistry.
do this?
Yeah,
That's what we're after. Simple as that. It's not a hard question. Yeah, there's a lot of input, there's a lot of staff, there's a lot of experts, quote unquote, but who's the one that said we're going to do this?
Senator, ultimately the decision falls under the incident commander,
And that was the fire chief then of East Palestine, you're saying?
who was in
You're
close-
saying he was the trigger guy. He was the one that said, okay, we're going to make this happen after we received all the input.
Yes, Senator, under the structure of Unified Command, the incident commander takes the lead.
And to clarify something, when you said that there were consultants and contractors that were on the ground assessing this, did they provide the modeling to Unified Command and then Unified Command reviewed it? Or was the data that was from the on-the-ground assessment provided to Unified Command and they determined the plan?
The data was provided to Unified Command, the inputs, and they determined the plan. Senator, I think it's important to note that the vent and burn worked.
It worked? Is that what you said? Sorry, I just didn't hear you.
Yes, the air testing throughout the process indicated by the EPA, by the Ohio EPA, and by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection notes that the air is clean. Water testing notes that the water is safe. We avoided the potential for a catastrophic, uncontrolled explosion that would have potentially shot harmful gas and shrapnel throughout the community.
So the bulk of the testing that I'm aware of occurred after the burn. So was there any in real-time testing of any human lungs or air quality in any of these people's houses, some of which were told to shelter in place while they watched a giant orange eruption above their home? Was there air testing done during the burn while these people were sitting inside of their homes?
Yes, and our air testing was in place shortly after the derailment. And air testing indicates that the air quality was safe throughout the community during the vent and burn, before, during, and after.
So there's data that shows post-derailment but pre-burn air quality, I'm guessing, right? So there should be levels before the burn. Then there should be data that's during the burn and after. Does that data exist somewhere?
Senator, yes, that's my understanding. And the data shows that in the community, outside of the evacuation zone, the air was safe.
So we, as a committee, have none of that data, so it's very difficult for us. I mean, I would say that to anyone. It's no personal offense to you. It just, in the absence of having reports and numbers and data, it's really difficult, especially based on symptoms reported by those who live in that community, that, you know, if people had rashes and can't breathe and are having respiratory distress, I would argue that, and if you weren't real-time monitoring in their homes or around their homes during this burn, I don't know how anyone can say that it worked or that no harm was done. Because if you're burning off things during that burn, you could argue the highest contaminant level would be during the burn.
Senator, I'm very sorry for the impact that this has had on the community. And I do understand that some of the citizens have developed symptoms with which they're not comfortable or familiar. And we would strongly encourage those citizens to go seek trusted medical attention, and Norfolk Southern will reimburse those visits and pay for the medical expenses if those folks would come visit us at the Norfolk Southern Family Assistance Center, which was established within hours, within a day after the derailment.
And so is the Family Assistance Center set up to ease community anxiety? Because if you're saying there's nothing wrong, there was no contamination or harm done, that was actually, you led me into my next question, was even the health compensation fund, why is it necessary if no one was poisoned?
Senator, the Family Assistance Center was set up within 24 hours of the derailment to help folks with recovery assistance, to help folks who were impacted by it, whether that's they needed to evacuate and they had expenses associated with that. It was also to help folks who may have just had inconvenience or been impacted. And it was also designed to provide folks with information. The testing by the air and the water is done by trusted government agencies, the EPA and the Ohio EPA and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection.
Do you know that when a entity does testing, a lab testing, that they own that data, therefore it's at their discretion as to what data is presented in a final report? Are you aware of that? You as Norfolk Southern can tell the entity you contracted, the acronym CH, whatever the entity, thank you. Please test for A through Z, but we want you to generate a report that says A through H.
Senator, I'm not aware of that.
I am, so I just wanted to ask, in terms of the public trust thing, that often all of the testing components are not displayed to the public and can be withheld because it's who owns the data. So the long-term water testing, how long is that? What is long-term in Norfolk Southern's operational definition? And then also the health compensation fund, what does that cover and who's eligible and what does that entail?
Senator, I'll note that it's also the EPA, and Ohio EPA, and the Pennsylvania DEP who are doing the testing as well.
Unfortunately, all three of them have lied about water testing before, so, but go ahead. Not my opinion, unfortunately, just the reality of historical government failure. So how long, what is the water testing duration that Norfolk Southern is providing? And also, what does the health compensation fund entail?
Senator, as I've talked to the folks of the community, and I've been there multiple times, I was in Darlington Township at the open house on Thursday evening, and it's really clear that folks are concerned about three things. It's long-term health costs, it's water monitoring, and it's property valuation. And so we've been in discussions with relevant stakeholders on a final solution for that would establish a long-term fund for each of those.
So every person, every family would have all of their healthcare expenses completely covered if they were to, in 5, 10, however many years it takes for these horrible carcinogenic things to happen, would be 100% covered, correct?
Senator, we are in the process of working with relevant stakeholders on
So the
this.
terms aren't final yet?
Yes, Senator.
Okay,
correct.
that's fine. And hopefully you can get that information. And then the water testing, what's the duration of that? 6 months? We heard a recommendation earlier. What is the plan for Norfolk Southern?
Senator, I've said from day one, Norfolk Southern's plan is to make this right. And we're going to be there as long as it takes, which means we're going to be there today, we're going to be there tomorrow, we're going to be there a year from now, we're going to be 5 years from now, we're going to be 10
So
years
if people
from
want
now.
their water tested for 5 years, then they could ask for that.
Senator, if folks want their water tested, we encourage them to go to the Family Assistance Center, and we are paying for that.
But they could have that testing for up to 5 years if they felt it was necessary. You just said 5 years. I'm not, if I'm wrong, you can correct me.
Senator, again, that would be part of this long-term fund that we're establishing.
So the duration of water testing is to be determined.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, got it. And I guess the other question I would ask is, in terms of there's 3 days that the train derails and then the burn takes place, correct? There's a gap there. Is there documentation of what was discussed or evaluated in that 3 days that shows what conclusions were made relative to the possible explosion, and were other explosions, did they occur over that 3-day span that were reported by residents hearing them throughout the night?
Senator, Unified Command, which was actually established under a presidential directive from the Department of Homeland Security, I think in 2003 or 2004, that structure. They considered, my understanding is they considered a number of different alternatives. The concern became, because of pressure in the car, some of the pressure relief devices had stopped working. As the NTSB report noted, the contents of the car is starting to polymerize, and some of the cars had been in a pool fire. The concern had been about a uncontrolled explosion, and so Unified Command made that decision in the early afternoon of Monday, February 6th, after considering a number of alternatives.
Okay, so there hopefully is documentation of what transpired and was discussed over those 3 days that someday somebody will see it and be able to read. My last questions are about some of the worker safety. Describe to me what how a train engineer, conductor that's on a freight train realizes that if it's a 150 car train, which is almost 2 miles long, how did they know if something derailed? Like, is there sensors? I know this sounds like a really dumb question, but I asked it the other day and I was a bit surprised at the answer. I'm envisioning some sort of visual in the dashboard of the engine of the train that something's blinking and it says like car 21 is derailed, and it's like an immediate thing. Tell me what really happens and how it's determined where the derailment has occurred in a very long train.
Senator, the NTSB investigation noted that the Norfolk Southern crew did everything appropriately.
Absolutely. There's nothing about the crew on there. I'm just asking, generally speaking, take away from this, just general derailment. What is their protocol? How would one of those workers determine? Would they have to walk the length of the train to see which car tipped over? Is there technology that's enabled within the beginning of the train and the dashboard?
Senator, there can be end-of-train devices which will signal to the train crew that there has been a break in the line.
And so that shows exactly what car it is, because if they have this, one of the documents I believe that you did provide was some sort of log of that entire train that did derail in East Palestine. I don't know what the proper terminology is. I'm going to call it like a record book for that train route, and listing all the cars. So would there be something that in the dashboard of a train that lights up for workers to know car number whatever is derailed? Or do the workers physically have to go inspect which car is derailed?
So I can certainly work with your office and give you the specific policies and procedures on that.
It's my understanding that to assess a derailment, one of the workers on a train has to walk the line, the route, the length of a train to figure out which car. And I was very taken aback by this procedure, because I thought it was quite antiquated and not only dangerous. And I said this to my husband last evening, and he said, well, what if it's nighttime? It's even worse, because my question was, what if you walk up to where it's derailed and I assume you'd be carrying this giant book and you're like, okay, car, whatever, and here's what's in it. And what if it just exploded? So I'm just trying to understand that protocol of like, how do we determine a very large train, what piece of it has derailed, and what the safety mechanisms are for workers that are on board operating a train. So if they have to walk the duration of the train, that seems pretty high risk.
Senator, my understanding is if there's a significant derailment, we actually ask our crew members to move away from the train.
Yeah, they're supposed to detach and leave what's derailed. That you are correct from what I've read as well. But I'm talking about the actual assessment, which with a decreased staffing capacity, and if a train's 151 cars or 50 cars, 150 cars long, that means one person has to walk up to almost 2 miles to determine which car has derailed. Is that accurate? Depending on the length of the train.
Senator, if there's a significant derailment, as we actually ask our crews, my understanding is to move away from the train.
But how do they know a significant derailment occurred if it's 50 cars back? That's my main question. How are these workers, how do they know that?
Senator, I'll be happy to follow up with your office on this.
Okay, I believe based on a former rail worker's account of his 20 years in working for Norfolk Southern, that is the protocol, is to walk the train to find the derailment. And then I wanted to ask if it is my understanding that there were 3 hot box detectors that were set off prior to, and at the derailment in East Palestine. I know you have an ongoing investigation, so you're probably not going to want to comment about this, but could you tell me how far apart these hot box detectors are? If I'm using the improper terminology, please correct me. And who gets a notification that they have been set off? So it's my understanding there was one detector went off. It was trending for the East Palestine train. It was like 1 to 2 degrees over the normal temperature. Dispatch says keep going, because that's who is called when these are set off. Number 2 was set off, and it was 65 degrees, some hotter than it should have been. Dispatch instructed the train staff to continue, and at derailment that the hotbox detector temperature was over or at 200 degrees, which is obviously why it derailed. So you mentioned in your testimony malfunctioning of sensors or improving on those accuracies. If a train conductor or engineer calls dispatch and says, we really believe that this train needs to be stopped, there's a major malfunction, what happens if they decide to follow their own judgment and intuition, since they are the people on the train, whereas dispatch, I don't know where they are located, because obviously the person driving the train or running the train or operating on the train knows the route. So they know up ahead there's a giant horseshoe curve or there's some major risky area for a train. what are workers' abilities to protect themselves and also the public and the environment? Are they fired if they, or are they given insubordination dockets for taking action themselves based on having a 3-sensor trip? Like, what if the train conductor said, I'm going to stop at 65 plus degrees over normal? What would happen?
Senator, we will not operate an unsafe train. In this instance, the NTSB was very clear. The crew did exactly what they were supposed to do, and we thank them for that. The wayside detectors were working and operating as designed, and there were no track defects. Once the train hit that wayside detector in East Palestine that showed that elevated temperature that you referenced, the train crew immediately started the braking process. However, my understanding from the NTSB report is that the train had already started to derail at that point.
And obviously the crew couldn't know that unless they got off the train and walked back. Maybe you employ a lot of Olympic runners, but that would be very difficult for them to sprint back to see how far back, and then obviously then would be in harm's way if something exploded. So on the worker piece, I really want to ask you, like, will you commit to actually supporting workers here in the sense of, you mentioned your increased safety standards and in what you plan to do. So would you support even just a basic labor representative, a no cost to the railroad company, to a company, whether it's the PUC or the FRA, to do the track inspections and address those types of safety issues? Because it's my understanding that doesn't even occur now, that there isn't one of the actual workers alongside either of these two safety regulators so that they can report issues. Is that something that you could agree to? I just need a yes or no.
Senator, thank you for that question. I am committed to our employees, and as I noted, since I became CEO of Norfolk Southern 10.5 months ago, we're on a hiring spree. We hired more conductors last year than at any other time period on record. Our pipeline of conductor trainees now is near a record high. And so when you look at other industries that are now laying people off, we're hiring at record numbers. And I will also note that 25% of our new hires last year were veterans. My first day as CEO of Norfolk Southern, I went out into the field and I walked into the crew room and I thanked my craft colleagues, our union employees, for everything that they do.
Sure. So then it sounds like you're saying yes, that you would support having a union member of the railroad workers accompany for those inspections, right? That makes sense. If you would be fine with allowing that to occur?
Senator, I need to understand the provision better. I can tell you that we'll follow the science and the data to improve safety. I personally have reached out to the union leaders of our two largest unions and asked them for their help in improving safety on Norfolk Southern and in the industry. That's how important our union workforce is and how important safety is to me.
So it makes sense then to have someone who does the job actually with the person inspecting. Often we see the inspectors may not have that same level of on-site knowledge and expertise because they're inspecting all sorts of things, but maybe having an actual worker who works in the field with trains as a part of rail track inspection, that makes sense. So, and it's not going to cost you anything. It's just simply allowing them to be present and report those same issues. So sounds like you're saying yes. And as you're aware of, and I would appreciate if you would commit to that formally. So the Rail Safety Act, can you commit to us today that you would support that? I know it's in the federal government. We are the state government, but it's an important effort being pushed now in Congress. Can you commit today to supporting the Rail Safety Act? I would assume yes, since you said you're about safety.
Senator, I certainly appreciate the leadership of the senators who have advanced that act. There are a number of provisions within that act that we certainly support. That includes enhanced tank car standards. That includes enhanced funding and research and design for wayside detectors. That includes enhanced notification for first responders. And I can tell you that.
What about shorter trains and appropriate staffing? It sounds like staffing you're hiring up from cuts that you had made prior, that Norfolk Southern had made prior. So that seems like it's going in the right direction. But what about appropriate staffing and shorter trains? My borough of Royersford, that my district office, where I just moved from 8 minutes up the street, so now I'm in a different township. I lived there for 7 years, and Norfolk Southern was literally in my backyard. Had this derailment occurred in Royersford, the borough, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And maybe some people would be excited about that, but I'm here. So, and the other evening, Thursday evening, I was at a township meeting about another disaster, and I got a phone call, why is the train stopped in the middle of the intersection? And so, again, you said increase communications with first responders. That would be great, because my police didn't know about it till after the fact. 23 minutes it sat there on the tracks, backed up traffic. Nobody knows what's going on. Everyone's hoping it's not going to blow. I'm trying to figure it out while I'm trying to fight a landfill with PFAS. So I really hope that commitment to enhance communication would really, really, really be helpful. But that train was so long, and allegedly they had to pick up 5 cars. I don't know how you do that. And the horn wasn't working. So I got 2 different stories as to why it was stopped for 23 minutes. It seems like the horn not working would be irrelevant if we don't stop if detectors are tripped at 60 plus degrees over their standard. But that safety piece is also, worker safety is directly attached to community safety. So if our trains aren't staffed appropriately and the trains are so long that you can't stop them in time from a disaster, do you see the problem here? So shorter trains would be helpful. Do you agree or disagree?
Senator, the NTSB did not indicate that train length had anything to do with the derailment in East Palestine.
What's the max speed you can go through Royersford Borough or another highly populated area? What's the max speed?
I don't have that specific for that line, so I'm probably happy to share that with
It's
you.
my understanding, unless it's truly classified as hazardous, despite can carry hazardous and toxic substances under a certain amount and not be considered hazardous or combustible, but that you can go whatever speed you want.
Senator, there are FRA mandated speed limits for each track, and I apologize.
I thought it was just key trains which carried hazardous combustible contents. Those have a speed limit max. The rest do not, even in highly populated areas. Senator Williams' district had a derailment in an urban center. Luckily, it didn't turn out like East Palestine, but we're asking, can we agree to either shorter trains or speed limit reduction in areas of high density population?
Senator, we are going to continue to model our train operations and utilize technology to make us safer. And there are a number of different inputs, as you can imagine, that influence train length and train operations. And that includes factors such as locomotive configuration, the terrain and the routing of the train. That includes the cars in the train, the commodities that are handled, and the configuration of the train makeup. We will continue to follow the physics, and we will continue to follow the science and the data. And if I may, I do apologize for the impact that block crossing caused your community.
I'm just glad a fire truck didn't need to get through, or an ambulance. That's my concern, because there's to go the whole way around, like past the nuclear plant to get around. So to your point about communicating with first responders, I'm just grateful that didn't occur, because they would have been stuck.
Senator, if I may,
Sure.
We just announced a regional training center for first responders.
So do you know that our first responders are predominantly volunteer in Pennsylvania, and EMS are grossly underpaid? That's why we're a little, at least I'll speak for myself and maybe Senator Williams, that the fire chief is likely volunteer. So maybe setting up some sort of way that rail companies can contribute to having full paid fire would be a little bit training. They're very well trained. And I don't know why they need money to replace equipment that allegedly isn't contaminated. So that's the confusing part as well. But I'm glad that those measures are being taken, because I certainly believe their equipment should be fully replaced. I'll defer back to you.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Just a few things out of the questioning from Senator Muth here. So the family assistance centers, we're aware of a few people that I know personally that have been turned away because they lived outside this radius. The 1 mile radius zone is completely inadequate. That's where I saw the chemical fallout. We've had testimony from people living miles outside of that. So I would hope Norfolk Southern would not be in the habit of turning away people that have concerns, health issues, or at the Family Assistance Center. And the next thing that came out of the questioning, of course, there was a discussion about between safety and business. Of course, we had Director Padfield testify from PEMA that it was his belief in the discussions with the Unified Command, it was more about getting the trains moving 48 hours later than the safety of the populace. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Senator Brooks next on the list. Okay, Senator Brooks is not here. Her question is there going to be any type of legacy fund set up for issues in the future that aren't identified now? That's similar to questioning from Senator Muth. So do you have a long-term plan of taking care of people?
Yes, Senator, I would suggest that the long-term care program that we're working with on relevant stakeholders is designed to cover just that. Again, as I've been in the community, and I've been there many times, those are the things that are expressed to me. And so we want to do what's right, and we want to make this right. We want to help these communities recover, and we want to help these communities thrive.
Thank you. You know, in that vein, we had Sheila Stiegler testify. She's a modern-day homesteader. Everything's planted or grown or lives on her property. And she said, we have a right to clean and pure water and preservation of natural resources, which have been violated as a result of this derailment and the lack of concern for the Pennsylvania residents. Sam Wenger testified he has a brand new baby born shortly after the derailment here, and he invited Governor Wolf or Governor Devine to come over and do sleepover at his house. It's easy for people miles away, hundreds of miles away, to say it's safe to go back. And what a sign of leadership that would be if the CEO of Norfolk Southern took up residence in Western PA or Eastern Ohio, huh?
I've been in our coal industry for about 25 years, and so I've spent a lot of time in the communities here of the Monongahela Valley and Greene County and Fayette County and Westmoreland and in Darlington Township. I've got a deep appreciation for the folks in these communities, and I've been here quite a bit, and I've drinking the water and I've eaten the food, and I am committed to the environmental remediation, committed to long-term testing and following the oversight of the US EPA and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And I'm committed to doing what's right for these communities with financial assistance and investing in their recovery. And Senator, each and every day, I'm gonna do the next right thing. I'm gonna see this through no matter what happens and no matter what it takes.
Thank you for your commitment. We're going to hold you to it. Senator Pennycook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Shaw, I want to start off by saying thank you for hiring veterans. Hopefully you're hiring them all from the United States Army Transportation Corps, because they are the most amazing railheaders I know. So my concern is on I understand you had 3 employees on the train. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator, that's my understanding.
So my concern, just as a little context, I was an Army helicopter pilot for 26 years. And when we have an accident, which unfortunately I've had 2, they get you into counseling real quick and they get you right back in the helicopter. What was the procedure for these 3, and are they being taken care of? Like, what are you doing to kind of get them past this horrific accident?
Senator, if I may, thank you for your service. I can certainly follow up with you about the specifics of how we're supporting the 3 employees who were in this horrific accident. Again, I understand the devastating impacts that this has had on the community. We're going to make it right. We're going to do more than less. We're going to follow the direction of the US EPA, the Ohio EPA, and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection on the environmental remediation. And we're going to be very transparent. And we're going to invest in the community, and we're going to help the community recover, and we're going to help the community thrive. And I'm going to invest in safety at Norfolk Southern and the industry.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-on question. I'm familiar with controlled burns. I've done a controlled burn in Iraq. I get it. If you could just walk us back to the train derailment, if you could walk us through what would have happened had you not done the controlled burn? Because I don't think people have any understanding of what that really means. I think I do, just from my very limited experience, but I think the magnitude of what we could have been looking at, I think we're all kind of glossing over. I personally think that the fire chief did the right thing with a controlled burn. I've seen a helicopter explode and the injuries that that causes when we didn't control the burn and we didn't let the fuel out. So I'm just curious if you could paint a picture for us of what that would have looked like had you not done the control burn, whoever the decision maker was. And I understand it was a group of people, and that really doesn't, I'm not concerned with who made the decision. The decision was made. It's kind of like water under the bridge at this point. But I just want, I think it's important that we all understand what that would have looked like, because I think we would have been catastrophic in life and property.
Can I add to your question that also, were there other options besides the controlled burn?
Yes, Senator, I think you bring up a very valid point. You know, the Unified Command was established, that structure was established by the Department of Homeland Security. The control burn followed a procedure that the Federal Railroad Administration established in 1994 for these types of circumstances. I can't talk to you about a hypothetical. What I can tell you is that the concern at the time, the very real concern, was there would have been an uncontrolled catastrophic explosion which would have shot vinyl chloride gas, which, as you know, is denser than air, throughout the community along with shrapnel. So all the relevant parties got together. We modeled the dispersion. The government authorities modeled the dispersion with inputs from a number of sources. The incident commander, in close coordination with Governor DeWine, who was in direct contact with Governor Shapiro, made the decision to execute the controlled burn. And based on testing by the EPA, the Ohio EPA, and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, it was a success. It worked. I was there. I was on the ground during that. I saw the smoke plume, and I know what it looked like. But it was the right decision to make, and the testing afterwards supports that. Because as you note, the risk was great for something much worse.
I just have one follow-on question. Do you feel, I earlier to Senator Muth's comment about, I'd asked about a standard operating procedure because that's, what I'm used to. Do you feel that our Pennsylvania Department of Emergency Preparedness or Emergency Agency, whatever, PEMA, do you feel like they were prepared to handle a situation like this, or were they maybe a little bit behind the power curve? Because me personally, if it was me and I was the PEMA director, I would have said, hey, there's an issue on the border. Let's just be safe and get 2 miles out of the zone. I just feel like we didn't have a plan. Can you comment on that? And if you're not comfortable, that's fine.
Senator, I can tell you that the government agencies did the dispersion modeling. I can't comment specifically about the Pennsylvania department that you referenced. We had, as I noted earlier, we set up a new first responder training center in Ohio, frankly, to support the folks from Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia who rushed to the scene. And I sincerely thank them for their courage and their action for what they've done. We can always get better, and we can always work on better communication. We can always work on better planning, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shaw, you indicated that other options were explored for the vent and burn. What were those alternatives?
Senator, thank you for the question. My understanding is that the Unified Command considered transferring cars using valves on the top of the car. However, as the NTSB report had noted, the pressure relief devices were starting to fail, and so that was not an option. And then hot tapping the cars, which would have actually entailed, my understanding is actually drilling a hole into the cars to pull product out. But as during the concern about the pressure in the cars and that the product in the cars was starting to polymerize, that was taken off the table as well.
Thank you. Can you tell me what happens when a Norfolk Southern worker sees a health and/or safety issue on the job? What happens? What do they do?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again, please?
Can you tell me what happens when a Norfolk Southern worker sees a health and/or safety issue on the job?
Yes, my expectation is they're going to report that and address that. We're a safe
Who do they
railroad.
report it to?
Well, they have a number of options. We just joined the Federal Railroad Administration's confidential close call reporting system. They could certainly report that to their supervisor as well. You know, we run a safe operation, and my expectation is that our employees are going to be safe and let us know. Since my tenure started as CEO 10 months ago, I've asked for transparency from our employees and asked for them to let us know when they see issues.
You said there are a number of options. What are those options? A number of options where they can report. What are those options?
Senator, that would be the FRA's confidential close call reporting system, or they could notify the.
That came out 2 days ago. What else? What is the other option?
They could notify their supervisor, and we also had a reporting system in place internal to Norfolk Southern as well.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about that internal reporting system?
I'm happy to provide you more details, Senator.
Okay, that would be very helpful. What about if it's an independent contractor rather than an employee of Norfolk Southern? Do they follow the same procedures?
Senator, standing here, I don't know that they don't. I can't.
I would appreciate an answer to that after the hearing. Can a worker slow down or stop a train without permission?
Senator, we expect that if we see that a train is unsafe, that we stop that train.
Can they stop it without permission?
Senator, I would have to share with you the exact policies to which you're referring.
Okay, I would like a copy of your policy about that. The same goes for, can a worker prevent a car or a train from departing on time without permission if they see a maintenance issue?
Senator, yes, that's the expectation.
Okay. Are there consequences to them for slowing down travel of the train? Like either slowing down their travel or slowing down the departure from a station because of a maintenance issue? Are there consequences to that worker?
Senator, our expectation is that we're going to operate a safe railroad and that our employees follow those policies and procedures. I'll note that last year we had fewer derailments than at any time period in the last 2 decades.
So there are no consequences to that worker if they raise a health and safety issue that slows down the travel of your trains?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Okay. How often do you conduct safety trainings with workers?
Senator, frequently is when the employee comes on the job.
Okay, when they come on the job, then how often after that?
Sorry, Senator, frequently, my understanding is when they start their shift, we'll have safety briefings.
Okay. A safety briefing, but what about a training? Do they get regular safety trainings for updates or things like that?
Yes, Senator, my understanding is we have safety training. We also have safety councils, which includes supervisors and our craft colleagues.
Okay. Can you give me some more documentation after the hearing about those trainings and when they occur?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do those trainings include educating the workers about their whistleblower protections under the Federal Railway Safety Act?
Senator, I'll be happy to provide you those specifics.
Okay. I would like to know that because those whistleblower protections are there for them. I would want to know how often they are made aware of those, whether they are made aware of them in writing, because the statute of limitations for reporting a violation of the Federal Rail Safety Act is 180 days, which is a very short statute of limitations, and a worker needs to know where to go to report those if they are not being heard by their supervisor or by any sort of internal process. If they've reported and they feel like it wasn't listened to, I want them to know that they have whistleblower protections and where to go. And so I'm looking for where in written materials do you distribute that they have those protections?
Senator, thank you for that. As I had noted previously, I've recently reached out to the head of our 2 largest unions and asked for their help in improving our safety of Norfolk Southern and for the industry.
Because what I'm hearing anecdotally, and which I'm trying to determine based on your materials, is that what you're saying in regards to safety is maybe not what the culture seems or what the workers feel like they can report. There's a difference between having a right on paper and actually feeling like you can report to your supervisor and that will be taken seriously and timely, and that you don't face any repercussions for that, whether you be demoted or your hours reduced or even terminated. So what I'm looking to see is that it's a culture from the top down and from the bottom up. And so that's why I'm looking, and I look forward to getting those documents from you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So turning to your promise of making Pennsylvania residents whole, first off, the 1 mile radius is inadequate. We passed legislation at this committee extending it out to 15, and a waiver process if people can prove that they have contaminants in their soil, air, or water, or somehow they've been harmed. Does your 1 million fund as a down payment for those within the 1 mile radius, and I hope you'll extend that out, include the loss of real property value? For instance, 221 Oakdale Road in Darlington, a 3-bedroom, 1.5 acre, 1.5 bath, 2.4 acre home sold on February 24th for $1,031. That's $1 a square foot. And that's a 15,000% loss on market value. Will your aid include loss in property value?
Senator, as I noted, we're working with relevant stakeholders, which I am confident will include Pennsylvania for long-term funding for property assurance program.
So yes, you will make up for this loss in value due to the catastrophe.
Senator, the actual specifics of the program have not been defined yet, nor is the scope.
I hope you'll include that then, as well as loss in businesses. One of our testifiers, Lonnie Miller, has a business a few hundred feet away from the catastrophe, and obviously she's seen a dip in business as well. I hope that will be included. You did mention you will include long-term medical expenses, but what about relocation?
Senator, if folks have immediate needs, I would strongly recommend that they go.
And this is longer term. So, for instance, agricultural loss of livestock. We did. I'm sure you noted many dairy or beef farms in the area, or testing proves that crops are contaminated. Will your relief in the long term assist with these people?
Senator, there's right now we are working with the U.S. EPA on broad sampling of soil for agricultural, residential, and commercial uses in Pennsylvania and in Ohio for that very issue. And I understand that this supplements the state's independent efforts to sample farms in western PA.
Thank you. Senator Muth.
Thank you. Quickly, do you have safety committees that are labor forums and then meets with management? Are those meetings done on a regular basis as part of Norfolk Southern's safety plan?
Yes, Senator, we have safety councils.
It's my understanding, I guess, that several years ago, this used to be a thing and has since been cut, meaning that those safety committees that are both labor and management are no longer. So maybe it's just management or not having those labor conversations. So if you could follow up on that for the committee, that would be great. And then also you mentioned about decreased number of derailments this past year, but what about your Federal Railroad Administration injury report rate? Can you get the committee that data for the last, 5-10 years to see the number of those injury reports submitted to the FRA? I don't expect you to have it in front of you, but if you could just.
Yes, Senator, we'll provide you the specifics. I will note that our injury rate in 2022 was the lowest it's been in the last 10 years.
That's great to hear. As well as Senator Williams mentioned, I've been made aware of some of the deterrents to reporting injuries, so I'm just curious on those numbers, and maybe we can have a follow-up conversation. And then I wanted to ask, as part of the Unified Command team, was there an environmental toxicologist a part of this Unified Command under whatever entity, agency, whomever, since we don't have the specific groups and regulators that were involved. Was there an environmental toxicologist as part of that unified command decision-making process?
Senator, I'm not sure exactly who was, everyone that was in the room. I know that government agencies modeled the dispersion pattern, which is what led to the evacuation area. And I know that ongoing testing before, during, and after by independent agencies has stated that the air is safe to breathe
So
outside of the
did
evacuation
Norfolk
zone.
Southern have modeling data that was compared to the federal agencies, or was it just the federal agencies presenting that plan or data to Norfolk Southern? It's my understanding that there were both.
Senator, I am not aware of Norfolk Southern doing its own modeling. I am aware that Norfolk Southern provided some inputs into the modeling, and then that was done by government agencies.
And then you can let us know about the environmental toxicologist, if you could get that information to us as well. And I just wanted to make a comment about worker exposure. When workers show up for work, again, I never thought about this till over the weekend after talking to a former worker. If I show up, my former profession is athletic training. I say I'm covering for another team and I want to see the ongoing injury management. So I can look that up in advance, usually did it the day before, so I didn't show up unprepared. Is there a way for a worker to look up the day before them going to work for a long trip overnight with some level of hazardous contents on the train? Can they look to see what's on the train they're about to operate or drive or staff for that next trip? Are they able to review that information in a timely manner?
Yes, Senator, the train crew has the train consist.
And when do they receive that? When they show up for work that day, or is it like some sort of electronically stored thing?
Senator, my understanding is it's with when the train is built and when they come on the job.
So I would, if I worked on, I come to the train yard, this is Katie's train for the day, I'm gonna take it to whatever state, and I then have to review it when I get there. I wouldn't know in advance.
Yes, Senator, that's my understanding.
Okay, so if it had 150 cars, I would have to review that in a pretty quick turnaround, correct?
Senator, I'm happy to provide you with the procedures.
That would be helpful, because I think you gave us one of the documents, which I think might have been similar to what workers see. I don't know, because it talked about the weights of cars and what car could be next to another and things to that nature. It's my understanding that it's pretty antiquated and that it's an actual physical book with a carbon copy attached to it. So if you could I just think it's difficult to manage a hazardous situation or report it, in addition to finding it if there's a derailment, if you have limited time to review what's actually being stored on the train. Does that make sense? Or maybe I'm missing a piece of the process of a worker's access to records.
We'll be happy to provide you with the information you've requested.
Thank you very much. And my last question is, you mentioned you were on the ground the day of, and I was curious. I had asked our National Guard, like, were we involved with this? Because I saw the Ohio National Guard was on the ground in full gear, air tank, the whole shebang, and I did not see many first responders. In fact, I saw firefighters that were, had finished whatever part it was, and they were standing there just in their uniform, no air tank on. And so I'm just curious as to, being that close on the ground, like what protective mechanisms are available. You're an employee of Norfolk Southern, so just as any other employee, same with those that then put down the new track. Were they given the appropriate safety equipment?
Yes, Senator, my understanding is they were. As I noted, air monitoring was in place shortly after the derailment. Our contractor and then our hazmat specialist arrived on the scene within hours and notified personnel of the appropriate PPE that would be needed.
And I would just urge you to expand your testing to include both PFOS, PFOA, and radium, so that we can get the full gamut of possible toxic exposure. As mentioned earlier by the previous testifier, it's better to test for a broad number of things and then find that they're zero and then move on, to test, continuing to test the ones that are detectable. So in the absence of that data, you're not truly being honest and showing the community what they could be exposed to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Muth. Our visit in February to the site, and your team was very forthcoming in taking us to ground zero, what have you, but your workers were not. I was surprised they were not in any protective gear, which I was surprised. So as a committee with oversight on emergency preparedness, I'm still after your unified command team configuration. God forbid this happens again, that we have oversight and make sure the right people are on board. We have heard from a PEMA hazmat team. They were not included. That's obviously needs to be rectified. In the United States Army, anytime we're in a situation with crisis action planning or any other operation around the world that I participated in, there's always courses of action. There's always 3 courses of action. We were told by PEMA that you guys only laid out 1 course of action for them each time. And if was that the only course of action, were there other options? Your command structure, we still needed to see that, as well as the decision-making process here. So hopefully, if we get this right with our oversight, we could prevent that from happening again. The final thought here, the subpoena, we're still missing documents. We received correspondence from your legal team. So the subpoena is still in place. And Mr. Shaw, we may request you back again once we have access to more documents and we have further questions. Thank you for your time and your indulgence. And we look forward to communicating with you in the future.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question, please? A follow-up question?
Senator Brooks.
Yes, and I am sorry, I apologize. I had to step out for a few minutes, and I want to thank you for asking my legacy question. But many of my questions have been asked, but I did just want to dovetail on Senator Muth's question in regard to Dr. Wellen, the previous testifier. Did you hear his testimony?
Senator, is this the gentleman from Purdue University to which you're referring?
Yes.
Yes, Senator, I did.
Yes. You did?
Senator, yes, I heard the gentleman from Purdue's testimony.
I share Senator Muth's concerns that perhaps there are things that we are not testing for that we should be testing for, and a year, 2 years down the road, we look back in hindsight and say, yes, we should have listened. So I as well would like to add my voice in urging you to take some of that input seriously and reevaluate whether those chemicals should be tested for. Also, I ask that the legacy provision go out at least 5, 6 years for things that perhaps are unknown today, but we learn about in the future. I think we owe that to the residents. The other question I have is, how many crew members were on this train?
Senator, my understanding is the NTSB report indicated there were 3 crew members on this train.
All right. And is that less crew members than perhaps the locomotive would have had 10 years ago? Now I know technology advances, but I think in the future, perhaps maybe we need more crew on these trains, but is that less crew than what would have been on the locomotive 10 years ago?
Senator, I'm sorry, I don't have the operating rules 10 years ago at my fingertips. I can tell you that we're not aware of any data that links safety to crew size.
Okay. And then my last question or my observation is, I know that, many of my colleagues as well as myself have expressed frustration about bridges and different things like that in our district that are in need of repairs, and it's very, 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 very difficult to reach you folks. And so in the spirit of trying to prevent another tragedy, I would ask that you pay more attention to capital improvements and things to that sort. As I said, I know I have a bridge in my district that we've tried to reach out for years because there's concerns as well as it hinders, local businesses. So I will end my questioning with that, but would ask that you invest in those capital improvements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. Last word to be from one of the residents, Caitlin Schwartzwelder. She was with insurance adjuster at her dog kennel a week and a half ago. And after about, I believe, 40 minutes inside, and Dan and I were both in there. We both got sick in her kennel. There's some chemicals are being retained in there. She had to go to the hospital. That's the reality these residents are suffering on. Mr. Shaw, thank you for your time, and we may have you back. Thank you. Finally, we have with us Mr. Robert Comer, a forensic railroad accident investigator. And Mr. Comer, if you could stay standing and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you for driving all the way up from the Midwest to be with us today here. It's an honor to be with you. If you could explain briefly to everyone listening your credentials, your experience, and then we'll go with questioning.
My background is military intelligence during the Vietnam War. I had a top secret crypto clearance with NSA. I did military intelligence work for 2 years in West Germany and for a year in the Philippines. And the Navy trained me on computers even back in the 1960s. So I had that background. And then in 1989, I did the first railroad crossing accident investigation because it happened right out close to my hometown of Alliance, Ohio. And when I was 9 years old, some family members got hit by a train at a different crossing on the west side of Alliance. Fortunately, they all survived, but I remembered that incident strongly. So when this man was killed in 1989, I decided to go out and do an investigation. And I found many situations with the railroad crossing and the approach to the crossing that indicated that the railroad didn't seem to care about the safety at the crossing. There was no whistle post for northbound trains, and all the neighbors said northbound trains didn't blow the horn. And there were no lights, no gates, and no bells at that crossing. And his family, when they lost him, there was a mother and like 3 children, and now their breadwinner is gone.
How many railroad investigations have you done?
Over 800 in 33 years.
And you're now retired from that work, or?
Still doing it.
Okay, and so what's your assessment of what you've seen and what you've heard so far, specifically for East Palestine?
I've listened to the testimony of Mr. Shaw to Congress and here. And in my 33 years, I have seen over and over again the railroad industry dodging serious questions about safety, covering up serious situations and injuries and deaths. I helped up in Anoka, Minnesota, where BNSF Railroad paid 2 men in that town $15,000 to lie to the police that this driver went around a lowered gate when he didn't, because 4 high school students were killed in that incident. This situation with our railroad industry, in 2 years, the railroad industry is going to be 200 years old. And in so many of the people that I've spoken to that were railroad employees over the years, and some people who are in federal agencies, they say the same thing, that the railroad industry in our country is the most protected and coddled industry in our whole country. The regulations are almost a joke. And the one thing I wanted to tell you that you haven't heard, that over 100 years ago, railroad employees put a little 4-line poem in locomotives and cabooses. And this is very important to hear because the railroad employees over the years know what the attitude is about owners and management when it comes to railroad safety. And the poem goes, uphill slow, downhill fast, tonnage first, safety last. Oh, so the railroad employees know what management or owner's attitude really is.
So what was your assessment of what you saw in East Palestine on your recent visit there?
I was just there yesterday, and the situation, when I listened to Mr. Shaw, I don't hear one detail from him about the specifics of what caused this derailment. Not one single word about the condition of the track, and he didn't say one word about who owns those rail cars. They're not Norfolk Southern, they're customer cars. Every one of those rail cars that was being transported on February 3rd belonged to a bunch of different companies. The vinyl chloride was transported for a company called Oxy Vinyl LP, which is one of the biggest PVC manufacturers in the entire world. And they know how dangerous vinyl chloride is, okay? And the big question is, why was the vinyl chloride, why weren't those cars put in the back of the train? And an investigation I did in Rosedale, Maryland, there was a 2013 derailment that caused the worst explosion in Baltimore County history. They had what I called a rolling bomb, a covered hopper car with over 100 tons of sodium chlorate, which is extremely explosive, and it was only 7 cars behind the 2 locomotives. And yet only 16 cars derailed, and there were 38 cars. If they had put the rolling bomb in the back, the worst explosion in Baltimore County history wouldn't have happened.
So why do you think they put the train in this order then? I appreciate you explaining this because I'd love to know. Clearly, the previous testifier wasn't really giving us a lot of detail about anything, but why, based on some of the documents, few documents we were given, it explained there were some marked as overweight, but okay for this route. Others that were wider or larger than the normal standard for rail transport. So why do you think then that they put these really toxic, flammable things in the middle of the train? Yeah, why would they put it in the? What are your
Because they're
thoughts?
not paying any attention.
So
They're
no one's
just-
paying attention.
They're just
to
making up the consist, which is all these different rail cars from all these different customers. And the big question that I haven't heard to date over all these years, not one single word about what about these customers' cars, the tank cars, the covered hopper cars. This car number 23 that had the fire under it, that was owned by a private company. Does Norfolk Southern, when they pick up these cars, do they check to see if the bearings and the boxes have been checked? Do they look at the wheels to see if there's any cracks or the wheels are worn or in bad condition? How about the couplers? I haven't heard one single word about inspections of couplers that hold the cars together. There's a YouTube video of a CSX train going down a track right next to a road, and all of a sudden a coupler breaks and the train separates. And then Mr. Shaw is not telling you the truth about the history of his railroad or the railroad industry, that how over so many decades, all the way back, they have been ignoring or dodging paying the money to increase the safety of their trains. Right here is a picture that I took yesterday of the track that went through East Palestine where the derailment happened. The wooden ties are in terrible condition. I went down through there and the ties are in terrible condition. And here's another thing that not one single word was said about this. The thing that holds a rail to a wooden tie is called a tie plate, okay? There it is right there in the picture, the tie plate holding that rail on that deteriorated wooden tie. there are 4 holes on each side for the spikes. And you think about it, you have a device called a rail plate that is holding the rail in position. If it can't hold the rail in position and the rail moves, it only has to move about 5 inches and the wheel falls off. Now you have a derailment, okay? So why in the world would they be using wooden ties when there are concrete ties? One of the biggest companies is right in Pittsburgh. I talked to them, Foster. They're selling concrete ties all over the United States. They are twice as strong as wood, and they last twice as long. And people all over the world, European countries are putting in concrete ties, even in South America and in Africa. And how many concrete ties does Norfolk Southern have in their large, I wrote down how many.
What's your view on Norfolk Southern's safety record in recent years?
Oh, he claims it's getting better. Well,
I think they had the most incidents over the last 10-year span
oh,
than any
absolutely.
other railroad.
Yeah, we have Class 1 railroads in the United States, and they've been merged and everything. You know, we have Norfolk Southern and CSX operating in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the eastern part of the United States, okay? And Norfolk Southern is, in 1982, the Norfolk Western and Southern Railroads merged, and it says in the documents, 19,420 route miles in 22 states and District of Columbia, okay? And I didn't hear one single word from Mr. Shaw about all the years that the railroad industry, including him and Norfolk Southern, have been trying to get rid of
Regulations that protect.
not only regulations, but people. They've been trying to get only one person in the locomotive so they won't have to pay 2 people. Well, Amtrak trains only have one person driving their trains, and that incident in 2015, that train got to 50 miles an hour got it to 106 miles an hour on a 50-mile-an-hour curve because the one guy driving the train fell asleep. And the entire train blew off the track. And people were killed and thrown out broken windows. And there are no seat belts in Amtrak trains, and there haven't been since 1971. Where's the safety? I was yelling at people at the Federal Railroad Administration and the NTSB. I said, why aren't you making sure all of our vehicles, we have, under the law, we have to have our seat belts connected, don't we? We have to wear seat
So,
belts.
Mr. Comer, we are out of time here, but I'll ask you, based off what you've seen, what can happen in the future with Norfolk Southern to prevent another such a tragedy?
Well, number one, they have to get rid of, there's inspectors, they have inspectors, and the state of Ohio and Pennsylvania has inspectors that are paid with our federal dollar, with our money, okay? The Pennsylvania DOT, in Ohio, the ODOT Rail Division, all these, they have inspectors, and yet we look at the track all over Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we see all these wooden ties that are in terrible condition. And right there in East Palestine, when I took those pictures, those rail plates, they have 4 holes on each side for the spikes. And when I took the pictures, there was only 1 spike on each side, and there were 3 empty holes on each side. In other words, there were 6 missing spikes. When you take the spikes away, now that rail plate that's holding that rail, where's the strength? With only 1 spike when there's 4 holes? Do you know, and I found out by talking to railroad employees why that happens. Those spikes, when they put them in those wood ties, down the road, they cause the wood to split. So then the tie has to be replaced. So if they put 2 or 3 or 4 in there, that wooden tie is going to split a lot faster, and they're going to have to replace it. And it costs a lot of money. When they're working on track with replacing bad rail or bad ties, they can't run any trains on that track while they're doing that, okay? There's a strong indication that this February 3rd incident when I looked at the video from Salem, Ohio, about 20 miles from East Palestine, that fire wasn't just a little fire where the bearing box is. It was big. And for them to say that that didn't cause the hot box detector to send a message to stop that train, I don't believe it. I think the dispatcher also got that message from that hot box detector and told them, just keep moving the train down to the Conway rail yard right across the border in Pennsylvania. And yet, we had that big fire. And why did it derail right where it did in East Palestine? Because I checked years back, and there was a siding connection and a siding switch right where rail car 23 derailed. And it was old, it had been abandoned, but Norfolk Southern never took that switch out. And when that car came up there with that wheel dragging and everything and hit those parts, all of a sudden, boom, a big derailment.
Thank you. Sadly, we are out of time. Senator Muth.
I just want to say thank you so much, and I apologize for having to run out, but I have to chair another hearing in a different room. So I just
Okay.
wanted to say thank you, and I'll send you my follow-up questions if that's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, because-
Thank you, Mr. Kermer. We do have to cut it off here. We've reached the end of our time. So I now recess the committee to the call of the chair. Thank you.
Let me turn my. Ooh, loud in my ear. Sorry, guys. Just got home. It was kind of interesting. He basically he threw the fire chief under the bus. He wouldn't say he was in the unified command. He wouldn't answer no questions. Replaced all this fire equipment that supposedly wasn't, contaminated. There was a lot of interesting stuff there. I listened to this a little bit earlier today, just off and on, and there were some good, points made. So I figured, I'm just going to air this because Senator Mastriano, he really went at him. I would have to say. We'll see what happens with it. I don't think anything is. He just sits there and lies. He can't answer no questions, as always. I don't know. He needs to extend the zone. He needs to get people out that wants to get out. That was ridiculous. That house that sold for $1,000 and some dollars. I never heard about that. That is nuts. So, I just wanted to hear this to give you guys kind of an insight. This is way different than the Senate. I think they went a little tougher on him this time. That railroad expert at the end was kind of interesting too. I could probably listen to him, for hours. He seems like he has a lot of knowledge. But I don't know. The more truth comes out, I always said that I call it the uncontrolled release, was done to open the railroad quicker, and it seems to be the facts seems to be coming out that that was the reason for that choice. Here we are, 5 weeks, 6 weeks almost into it, and they're slowly coming out. So his little thing about there were 6 cars they wanted to detonate, and they only detonated 5 of them. I find that kind of really funny because I'm going to do this on a separate video because I've been digging into the drone footage of when they released that stuff and comparing it with the EPA statement they released with the pictures and the cars labeled and everything else. That was kind of interesting because the EPA on their report they released showed the 5 vinyl chloride cars together, and them are the ones they supposedly released. But you watch the drone footage, you can see the initial release of the group of cars, but then there is another release a little bit farther down. So I find that very interesting. The more he talks, the more stuff I get to dig into, I guess. All right, I'm going to end it there. I will upload this on my other channel. For those of you, I have a second channel. I try to upload to both, but I do forget. Lives are always on this channel. My other channel is in the description. It should be. It's America 2.0 Media. I upload things there all the time. I do forget to upload it here too. I'm eventually going to merge them two channels into one to make it a lot easier. But just so you guys don't miss out on stuff, you might want to check that out too. Got a council meeting tonight in East Palestine, so this is going to be kind of interesting because I didn't hear the part about Shaw, throwing the fire chief under the bus, and I'm sure it was more than him that made the decision, but if it came down to him making the decision, would that explain the $3 million that was given to the fire department? Supposedly for equipment, and they bought this brand new fire truck that, I think is a little extreme for our town. 100-foot ladder. We only have buildings that are like maybe three stories high is the biggest. So I don't know. That's interesting. I think he's just trying to pass the blame on to, and he wouldn't answer the question who was in that command unit, and I can't get nobody that was in that command unit either. All I know, it was just the wine and the city officials is all I got too. So I hope he does, include who was in there, because I would really like to know who actually made the decision, who decided to say, hey, this is what we're doing, who's pulling the trigger. Interesting. Very interesting. All right, guys. I'm going to get off here. I'm going to go to that council meeting tonight, see what goes on there. Probably not much of anything, but I still like to show up because I want to keep this narrative going, because mainstream media is about out of this. They show up for big events now. That's it. You may see a report here or there about it, and yeah, Ohio, I will get to that momentarily too. Got that to do a video too. Ohio filed a lawsuit against them. But media is slowly backing away from this, and that's what the railroad wants. They want this to be dropped, and so they can just sweep it under the rug like they tried to do in the beginning. But, luckily there was a group of us that, just wouldn't let this be shoved under the rug. And it just happened to start getting mainstream media attention, and it turned into something a lot bigger than what I think they thought it was going to be. So, thank you to everybody out there that, did not give up on this. That's followed this from day one. But, all right, I'm going to get off here. I just got home. I want to eat real quick before I go to this meeting. If there's anything interesting, I will let you guys know. But other than that, all right, thanks for tuning in. I may do a video tonight. I don't know. I need to catch up on my videos. We got a lot of interesting stuff happening in town too. New stuff being built. I didn't look at today's DeWine's report he puts out every day. It's kind of a joke now, but I don't know. Maybe I'll cover that tonight. But thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to go eat. I need to get changed so I can go to this meeting. And tomorrow I'll be covering, they are having a youth questionnaire seminar type thing. It's out in Canfield at the library it's for the youth to ask questions, you know, for what they're worried about. It's put on by the same group that, if you guys watched the panel, the EP, East Palestine United, same group is putting it on. So, you know, there's probably going to be, you know, experts there and everything. But I'll be covering that Tuesday. I don't even know what time that is. I'll have to look. But we'll cover that Tuesday. I would like to live stream it, but like I said, if I live stream it, I may only be able to show the people, you know, the experts sitting at the table, because basically, you know, because I'm filming kids, and you know, I know you're in public, you have no right to privacy, but you know, I respect people's privacy. Some people don't want their kids on film, so. But at least we could hear the questions, we can hear the answers, we can hear the concerns of the kids, because you know, when I'm out, I get more support from the kids than I do from, you know, older people, which I find very odd, but I guess it's their future that's on the line here, really. So maybe that's why they're, you know, more into it. But all right, I got to go eat. Thank you guys. I'll check you out.